Watch what happens to a relationship's dynamic when one person begins needing something the other provides. It starts subtly. A slight shift in how requests are made, a change in the timing of conversations, a new quality in the way conflicts are handled. The dependent person begins speaking more carefully, apologizing more frequently, accommodating preferences they previously would have challenged. The dynamic has shifted, and with it the entire architecture of power between them. This transformation occurs so gradually that both parties often miss it happening. There is no formal announcement, no explicit negotiation, no conscious decision to redistribute authority. Yet the relationship operates according to entirely new rules that reflect the underlying dependent structure rather than the personalities or intentions of the individuals involved. Dependence is the invisible hand that shapes every human interaction. Not the obvious dependencies. Those are easily recognized and managed. But the subtle ones that creep in through emotional needs, social insecurities, financial vulnerabilities, or professional ambitions. These create leverage points that reshape relationships, whether or not anyone intends them to. The person who controls what another needs inevitably gains power over them, regardless of their conscious intentions. The person who needs what another controls inevitably loses autonomy, regardless of their desire to remain independent. These shifts happen mechanically, driven by the psychology of scarcity and abundance rather than by malicious manipulation or deliberate strategy. Most people fail to recognize these dynamics because they focus on surface-level interactions rather than underlying structural forces. They see the symptoms, changes in behavior, shifts in decision-making authority, alterations in communication patterns, without understanding the dependency structures that create these symptoms. Understanding how dependence operates provides strategic insights into all relationships, from romantic partnerships to business arrangements to political alliances. It reveals why certain people consistently gain influence while others consistently lose it, regardless of their formal positions or stated intentions. The process follows predictable stages that repeat across different contexts. Initially, both parties maintain relative independence and equal negotiating power. Each person has alternatives, and neither desperately needs what the other provides. Decisions get made through mutual agreement rather than one person deferring to the other. Then circumstances change. One person's alternatives diminish while their need for what the other provides increases. This might happen through career changes, financial setbacks, social isolation, emotional crisis, or simple life transitions that alter resource availability. As dependence develops, subtle behavioral changes begin appearing. The dependent person starts timing their requests more carefully, reading the provider's mood before making important conversations. They begin framing their needs as minor inconveniences rather than significant requests. They express gratitude more frequently and more elaborate. The emotional realm provides the clearest examples because emotional needs are often unconscious and therefore unmanaged. Someone who desperately needs approval will gradually surrender decision-making authority to whoever provides that approval most reliably. Someone who fears abandonment will slowly compromise their own preferences to avoid conflict that might threaten the relationship. These emotional dependencies create predictable power shifts that both parties feel but rarely discuss openly. The person providing emotional security gains implicit authority to set terms for the relationship. The person seeking emotional security accepts those terms even when they conflict with their stated values or independent preferences. Consider the workplace dynamics that emerge around emotional validation. The employee who needs constant reassurance about their performance gradually becomes more deferential to whoever provides that reassurance. They begin asking permission for decisions they previously would have made independently. They start seeking approval for ideas they previously would have implemented without consultation. The manager who provides this emotional validation gains influence that extends far beyond their formal authority. They can shape not just the employee's work decisions, but their entire professional identity and career trajectory. This influence operates through the employee's emotional needs rather than through official hierarchical structures. Similar patterns appear in romantic relationships around security needs. The partner who fears abandonment gradually accepts treatment they previously would have rejected. They avoid asserting preferences that might create conflict. They prioritize harmony over authenticity because their emotional security depends on maintaining the relationship. The partner who provides emotional security gains disproportionate influence over shared decisions, from minor daily choices to major life directions. They do not need to demand this authority explicitly. It flows naturally from the dependency structure that has developed between them. Office politics illustrates these dynamics particularly clearly. The administrative assistant who controls the executive's calendar gains influence over colleagues who need meeting access. They begin receiving small favors, deferential treatment, and advance information about decisions. Their formal position suggests minimal authority, but their control over access creates substantial practical power. The IT support person who controls system access gains similar influence over employees who depend on technology for their productivity. They can accelerate or delay problem resolution, provide or withhold access to new tools, prioritize or deprioritize service requests. This technical dependency creates social power that operates outside the official organizational structure. Project-based work creates temporary but intense dependency relationships. The team member who controls critical project information gains authority over colleagues who need that information to complete their tasks. They can shape project timelines, resource allocation, and even career advancement opportunities for others through their control over essential knowledge. These workplace dependencies often persist long after the original project's end, because they create social networks and reputation effects that influence future opportunities. The person who provided valuable access or information in one context gets remembered and included in subsequent initiatives. Family dynamics demonstrate how dependency operates across different life stages and changing circumstances. Adult children who return home due to financial difficulties find themselves subject to parental authority they had previously outgrown. The dependency relationship recreates power imbalances from childhood, despite the adult child's age and experience. Elderly parents who become dependent on adult children for transportation, medical management, or financial assistance experience similar role reversals. The adult child gradually gains influence over decisions the parent previously made independently. This shift often creates emotional difficulty for both parties because it contradicts their historical relationship patterns. Marriage relationships evolve through various dependency cycles as circumstances change. The spouse who takes career breaks to raise children becomes financially dependent and gradually loses influence over financial decisions. The spouse who becomes the primary earner gains authority over spending, saving, and major purchases, even when both parties intended to maintain financial equality. Financial dependencies create even more explicit power redistributions. The person who controls money inevitably influences how it gets spent, regardless of formal agreements about financial equality. The person who depends on someone else's income gradually accepts decisions they would never accept if they had independent financial resources. This dynamic affects everything from career choices to social activities to geographic location. The financially dependent person finds themselves living according to preferences that serve the provider's interests rather than their own. They may not recognize this shift because it happens gradually through a series of individually justifiable decisions. Professional environments amplify these patterns because they combine multiple dependency layers. Financial, social, and career advancement needs all operate simultaneously. The ambitious employee who needs career advancement becomes vulnerable to anyone who controls promotion opportunities, project assignments, or professional networking access. This creates complex power webs where influence flows according to who controls what others need, rather than according to formal organizational charts. The assistant who has the manager's ear gains power over colleagues who need the manager's attention. The colleague who has client relationships gains power over those who need client access. Information dependencies add another layer of complexity. In knowledge-based environments, whoever controls access to critical information shapes how decisions get made. The person who needs that information gradually adapts their behavior to maintain access, even when this requires accepting conditions they would normally resist. These information asymmetries create power imbalances that persist even when the formal hierarchy suggests equality. The team member who attends key meetings gains authority over those who depend on them for updates. The employee who has historical knowledge gains influence over those who need context for current decisions. Social dependencies operate through reputation and relationship management needs. Someone who needs acceptance by a particular social group becomes vulnerable to anyone who controls access to that group or influences opinions within it. They gradually modify their behavior, opinions, and even identity to maintain social standing. This social dimension explains why certain individuals gain influence in community organizations, social clubs, or professional associations despite having no formal authority. They understand how to position themselves as gatekeepers for social acceptance, networking opportunities, or reputation management. Technology has created new categories of dependence that reshape power structures in ways previous generations never experienced. Digital platforms create dependencies on algorithmic distribution, social media followers, online reviews, and digital payment systems. These dependencies give platform controllers enormous influence over millions of individual users who have no direct relationship with them. The content creator who depends on platform algorithms for audience reach becomes vulnerable to policy changes that affect their livelihood. They gradually modify their content to satisfy algorithmic preferences rather than expressing their authentic perspectives. The platform effectively shapes their creative output through dependency rather than censorship. Small business owners who depend on digital payment systems find themselves subject to policies that can eliminate their ability to receive payments. This creates compliance pressure that shapes business practices according to payment provider preferences rather than customer needs or business logic. Social media influencers experience similar constraints through their dependence on platform metrics and monetization systems. They begin creating content designed to maximize engagement rather than expressing genuine opinions or providing authentic value. Their entire public persona becomes shaped by algorithmic feedback rather than personal values. The ride-share driver who depends on platform dispatch systems loses autonomy over their work schedule, pricing, and customer relationships. They become subject to rating systems that can eliminate their income source, creating pressure to accept conditions they would reject in traditional employment relationships. E-commerce businesses that depend on search engine visibility find themselves subject to algorithm changes that can devastate their traffic overnight. They invest enormous resources in search engine optimization, essentially allowing search companies to dictate their marketing strategies and website design. Digital dependency extends beyond individual economic relationships to affect entire industries and regions. Cities that depend on technology platforms for economic development find themselves vulnerable to policy changes that can relocate economic activity to other regions. This creates political pressure to accommodate platform preferences in ways that might not serve broader community interests. Educational institutions that depend on digital platforms for student recruitment and course delivery become subject to platform policies that can affect their ability to reach students or deliver education. This influences curriculum design, teaching methods, and even educational philosophy to align with platform requirements. The cryptocurrency ecosystem demonstrates how technical dependencies can create new forms of economic control. Users who store value in digital wallets become dependent on wallet software, exchange platforms, and blockchain network effects. Technical decisions made by developers can affect the value and usability of individual holdings. Smart contracts create automated dependency relationships where individuals become subject to algorithmic execution of agreement terms. This removes human discretion and negotiation from contractual relationships, potentially creating new forms of inflexible dependency that cannot be modified when circumstances change. Breaking free from problematic dependency requires recognizing the specific structural forces at play rather than simply trying to assert independence through willpower. Each type of dependency has particular vulnerabilities and potential alternatives that must be developed systematically. Emotional dependencies require developing internal validation systems and alternative sources of emotional security. This might involve therapy, meditation practices, friendship diversification, or creative pursuits that provide intrinsic satisfaction rather than external validation. Financial dependencies require creating alternative income sources, reducing expenses, or developing skills that increase employment options. The goal is not necessarily complete financial independence, but sufficient alternatives to avoid being trapped by any single financial relationship. Professional dependencies require building diverse skill sets, industry connections, and reputation assets that create career options. This provides negotiating power within current professional relationships and escape routes if those relationships become problematic. Information dependencies require developing direct access to critical knowledge sources or creating alternative information networks. This might involve industry associations, educational programs, or strategic relationships that bypass existing gatekeepers. Social dependencies require expanding social networks beyond any single group or developing reputation assets that provide social security across multiple communities. This creates independence from any particular social hierarchy while maintaining beneficial relationships within it. The most sophisticated operators understand these dependency dynamics and use them strategically. They work to minimize their own vulnerabilities while positioning themselves to provide what others need. This creates asymmetrical power structures that enhance their influence without requiring explicit manipulation or coercion. They diversify their dependencies across multiple relationships rather than concentrating vulnerability in any single connection. This provides alternatives if any particular relationship becomes problematic while maintaining access to resources they need for success. They also cultivate the ability to provide valuable resources to others, whether emotional support, financial opportunities, professional connections, critical information, or social validation. This creates positive dependency relationships where others benefit from the connection rather than feeling exploited by it. Understanding dependency dynamics also provides insights into larger social and political structures. Governments gain power by creating citizen dependencies on services, benefits, or regulatory permissions. Corporations gain power by creating customer dependencies on proprietary systems, platforms, or products. These macro-level dependency structures shape individual behavior across entire populations. Citizens gradually accept government authority that they would resist if they had viable alternatives. Customers gradually accept corporate policies that they would reject if they had competitive options. The concentration of dependency-creating resources, whether in technology platforms, financial institutions, educational systems, or media organizations, creates corresponding concentrations of social power. Understanding these patterns provides insight into how societies organize themselves and why certain institutions gain influence over individual behavior. Most importantly, recognizing how dependence reshapes power enables more conscious relationship choices. Instead of accidentally creating problematic dependencies, individuals can make strategic decisions about which dependencies to accept, which to avoid, and which to develop as sources of beneficial mutual exchange. This understanding allows for the creation of interdependent relationships where both parties provide value to each other rather than asymmetrical dependencies where one party gains power over the other. Such relationships prove more stable and satisfying over time because they serve both parties' interests rather than exploiting vulnerabilities. The goal is not complete independence, which is neither possible nor desirable in a complex social world. The goal is conscious management of dependencies to create beneficial relationships while avoiding the quiet surrender of autonomy that occurs when these dynamics operate unconsciously.